My grandpa has this ranch about 25 miles east of Payson, Arizona. It's very secluded, but the land is good for grazing cattle. I spend a lot of time running Jersey cattle on the range. Every night, one of us rides out to check on the cattle in the field and to check the fence line for holes in the wire. A few nights ago, I was riding out to check on the herd at about 1:30 a.m. While out on the nightly ride, I kept hearing rustling in the tree line, running along the fence perimeter. At first, I figured it was a coyote or squirrels, since that's what the logical explanation would be. It would go away, but every 10 to 15 minutes, the rustling would start up again. The second time I heard it, I was off my horse and walking him to a little water trough. The cows were about 150 to 200 yards away, but just within my view with moonlight. I heard the rustling again, but this time it was heavy. Me and my horse, Vegas, both looked up at the same time, wondering what it was we were hearing. At this point, I came to the eerie realization that whatever was out there was tracking me and Vegas, and it didn't seem so interested in the cows. So in an attempt to scare it off, I got back on my horse and grabbed my whip and uncoiled it, and cracked it a few times rather than using my pistol. The rustling stopped, and the forest was dead quiet once more. Not thinking much about it, I went back to count the head. I marked 38 heads. All the cows were there, so I started my way back to the house. I was about 3.5 miles away. It was about 10 minutes of silence until I heard the rustling again. At this point, I was getting pissed. I figured it was some little dumb coyote, thinking we were going to lead him somewhere. So I called my grandpa on my radio and told him I was going to fire my gun so he didn't get worried. So I reached down and pulled my revolver from my side, and I fired one round into the air. The rustling stopped as the shot rang out through the woods and mountains. My ears rang, and the smell of gunpowder filled my nose as the smoke settled. After I calmed Vegas down, I started riding back, only for the rustling to come back 5 minutes later. I started getting really nervous at this point, because usually coyotes run away when they get scared by a loud noise. I didn't have a flashlight on me because I'm dumb and forgot, so I used my small iPhone flashlight and dismounted. I slowly walked to the tree line where I heard the rustling. I then pulled my gun out just in case an animal was about to jump at me or something. I flashed my light around through the clearings in the trees, and to my right, I heard rustling about 100 feet away. I turned to look. Just as I turned, I saw a black silhouette of a horse run across the trail. I immediately started to wonder if that was one of our horses, or if someone else's horse had gotten loose in our pasture. I rode over to where I saw the horse, and noticed that the horse had come out of some pretty dense brush. I was pretty confused. How the heck did a horse run through all that brush and not leave any sort of path? There was no sign of the horse anywhere, but it was dark, so after a few seconds of looking at where the horse came through, I decided to ride back. As I turned, I stopped, frozen in fear. In front of me, about 50 feet away, was a silhouette of a man wearing a flat-brim hat. He appeared to have chaps on. I dropped my gun and heard the sound of it hitting the ground echo through the woods. I quickly reached down to grab my gun to aim it at the shadow, but when I looked, it was gone. I got back on Vegas, and we rode like the wind to get out of there, constantly looking behind me in fear of it following. I made it back and told my grandpa. He was trying to calm me down and said he's had some weird experiences too. He doesn't like to talk about it, but it would seem like our land is haunted by cowboys past. A few summers back, I worked at a camp that was nearly 100 years old. The camp was a place for those who had suffered brain injuries, and it served adults and kids with varying levels of mental ability. Many campers felt it was a great way to help them get better, and became a highlight of many of the campers' rehab journeys. Campers and workers alike joked the place was haunted, but I had thought it was one of those funny camp legends to mess with the campers and share around the fire. As a camp leader, I had my own room in an old cabin, and I shared a bathroom with one other leader who lived on the other separate half of the cabin. One night, I was up late dealing with a camper having a meltdown. Around midnight, I had finally gotten her to sleep, and I was trekking back to my own cabin when a nighttime storm started to move in. I sprinted the rest of the way, and as soon as I hit the door, it started pouring. I realized at this moment that I still had my walkie-talkie on me. Usually we charge them in the main office at night, but I decided to not run into the storm, so I turned the walkie-talkie off and set it on my dresser. Shortly after that, I went to bed. I awoke at around 3 a.m. to what felt like someone poking my leg. I was really confused by the sensation. I opened my eyes and looked down at my leg in the darkness, but I couldn't see anyone in the room with me. I figured it was just some weird muscle tic, so I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. Just as I was starting to fall back to sleep, I felt the poking again. When I peeked under the sheets, I saw nothing but just my own leg down there. Again, I just figured it was a weird muscle tic and tried to go back to sleep. After about 5 seconds of trying to go to sleep, I felt another weird sensation in my leg. This time it wasn't a poke, but more like a hand starting to coil around my leg. Before I could reach to turn on the light, I felt whatever it was grab my leg and pull me. It was hard enough that it pulled me right off my pillow. It was as if a whole hand had wrapped around my calf and pulled really hard. I quickly jumped up out of the bed in fear. As my feet hit the floor, my walkie-talkie across the room lit up and beeped as it turned on. The only way that could normally happen was if someone physically flipped a button on the side. The walkie-talkie stayed on, and I was paralyzed in fear. For a few seconds, I wasn't really sure what to do. I then remembered that there was another camp leader on the other side of the cabin. I sprinted out of my room and straight to her room. After waking her up and explaining what had happened, she told me it must have been a dream or something, and that she would walk me back to help check. As we walked in, I turned on all the lights and checked to make sure that no one was hiding in the closet or under the bed. Just as she was walking out, the walkie-talkie beeped again. It scared us both. From that night on, I refused to sleep in that room. When I was about 16, 2 buddies of mine from high school told me about a cemetery that didn't have any headstones outside of town near Lake Winnebago. I'm a nut when it comes to anything creepy or unsettling, so immediately I was in. They were excited that they had actually convinced me to come with them, and after school got out, we drove out to this supposed cemetery. Now, one thing about this cemetery is that it was essentially in the middle of nowhere. There was a small park with nature trails around it, leading to some pretty nice sitting areas and stuff. There was an old Army Reserve training course to the east, and further to the northwest was the mental hospital. When you first come into this place, there's a boat launch where the ferry used to go back and forth across the lake to the city directly opposite us. The thing is, this cemetery was off the beaten path. You had to go down a marked trail for about 50 feet before taking a sharp right through the underbrush and marshland to find it. When we got there, there was a chain-link fence and what I thought at first was an empty soccer field. It was eerie to say the least. As we looked on from outside the fence, one of my friends turned to me and told me, "Okay, so before we go in there, there's a couple things you should know. 1, do not go to the back right corner. And 2, if you hear somebody talk to you, just stop and leave immediately." I really didn't think a whole lot of this, mostly because my friend had a penchant for being overly dramatic about a lot of things, so I just agreed. I was eager to get inside the fence and see what this place was all about. As soon as I stepped through the gate, everything went silent. I mean, legitimately everything. No birds sang, no crickets chirped. There weren't even mosquitoes in that place. It threw me for a loop. My stomach sank immediately, but I didn't want to seem like a chicken, so I didn't say anything and started to look around. One of my friends was a photography student, and he started to take pictures of the trees and stuff around us, while my other friend followed him for most of the time. I decided to go off on my own. I was kind of just wandering at this point, but I stopped when my foot sank down further than I expected. At first, I thought that I'd fallen into a critter den or something. I was wrong. Under my foot was a round stone disc, covered in moss. I could barely make out the numbers 103 etched into it. My heart was in my throat. A chill shot down my spine like someone had dropped an icicle through my skull and speared me through. I suddenly got a horrible feeling, that kind of feeling when you find yourself somewhere where you don't belong. Despite the horrible feelings racing through my body, I decided to press on through the field. I walked the majority of the length of the field, finding more round stones with numbers on them, all worn and weathered from age. I felt sick. When I looked up, I noticed something I was shocked I hadn't seen before. Across from me, to my right, there's a sort of sitting area with an American flag hanging limply on its mast, and a massive boulder with a carved base. I went over to look at it and found an inscription which did nothing at all to ease my anxiety. This monument is dedicated to the 675 unnamed souls interned here. Amongst their number are doctors, nurses, and patients who were claimed during the epidemic, as well as soldiers who fought for the Union 1861 to 1865. I was freaked. 675? It hit me that this wasn't just an unmarked cemetery. It was full of mass graves if the numbered stones were anything to go by. I ran at full tilt back to where the guys were hanging out. I was hyperventilating and saying that I was not okay with being here anymore. They gave me crap for being a baby, but I told them that I'd happily walk home if they were going to be mean about it. I wasn't comfortable walking across literal pits of bodies. I guess that convinced them because they agreed, and we started to walk back the way we came. This is when I heard her voice. Behind us, maybe 15 feet or so, a woman cried out to us. It was the saddest, most desperately lonely sounding voice I've ever heard in my life. Don't go. It was only a statement, but it froze me stone still. I didn't even breathe. My friends didn't turn around, but they did tell me to double time it back to the car. I don't remember running. I do remember the sudden blast from the car door, letting out the heat it had collected under the sun. We were gone in record time. The weirdest thing about it, though, was that I couldn't stop crying. I full-on sobbed for at least half an hour after we left out of there, like the kind of crying you do at funerals. I was so sad, and I didn't understand why, but I couldn't shake it until we parked at McDonald's and the guys handed me a bottled water. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, I asked the guys if they had heard what I did. They said they had, and that they had warned me not to go to the back right corner. I don't know whose voice that was. She sounded like the loneliest woman to have ever existed, and I could hear the tears in her voice before I registered what she'd said. I wish I could know her name, but when she was 1 in 675, the odds were against me. What I do know, however, is that we were the only people in the park when we got there, and the only people there when we left. I refuse to ever go back to that place. Thanks for watching this video to the end. I really appreciate all the support you guys have shown. Be sure to like and comment on the video. Also, if you aren't already a subscriber, go ahead and subscribe now, as well as hit the bell to be notified when new videos go live. You can also find my links for Facebook and Twitter below in the description. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next video.